Just really quickly, just building off the last conversation, someone asked if there are other events like this, but maybe a little bit different. There are some. Definitely come see me afterwards. Mark Barros runs some very interesting hardware workshops that have been scattered all over Toronto, all different cities. HardwareCon. There's a bunch of things going on where people want to continue and dive further into these topics, which I think builds on the other person's comment. I think it's our responsibility to help build this side of the maker movement. I think Ben from Bolt is in the back. There are a number of people in this room who can shape the direction of what we're doing here as, let's call it maker pros or whatever this definition of what we are is. And I think if we were to come together and outside of meeting, and MakerCon is always where we meet, but I think the interesting thing is how we continue after we leave here. Anyway, my name is Eric Klein. Going to have my presentation come up. There we go. Oop, okay. And I'm going to speak to you for a little bit. Interestingly enough, I'm going to go back to those last slides. Number one, I'm one of those 42% of people who are really interested in giving back some of the knowledge that I have. I love meeting other makers because I always learn something and I always teach something. That's half the reason I just flew all the way across the country to be here, because this is the place where all the cool people are. This is where the makers, the information is exchanged. And interestingly enough, on his slides, on the slides on revenue, most of the companies that were represented in that survey, at their peak, were going to make less than $5 million a year. And the interesting thing is, I'm going to talk about two things today, actually. I'm up here right now to talk about how to build a business where that is the model, where you're going to have a healthy, successful business, but you're not going to make a tremendous amount of money, potentially, relative to venture capital. And so I want to talk about financing. And then later on today, I'm going to flip my hat over, and I'm going to run a panel, and we're actually going to bring up some other venture capitalists, including myself, and we're going to talk about the venture side of it. So I think over the course of the day, you're going to get a perspective on whatever size your business is, how to think about running it from a business perspective. So my background, I'm one of the partners at Lemnos Labs. We're the premier early stage hardware venture fund and incubator. We're based in San Francisco. We only take 8 to 12 companies per year for our program. They come and live with us for 6 to 18 months. So obviously the maker movement is far bigger than any impact that we can have directly in our building. And that's why we love attending events like this. Our portfolio companies have raised almost $100 million in venture funding. And so I have some perspective I'll share on that later on. But I really want to talk about the hardware fairy tale, which is, I can see my fonts got mangled a little bit, but don't worry, you can read it. There's a fairy tale, I think, that most people, a singular path that most hardware entrepreneurs will go down. And they've heard this from other entrepreneurs. You start with a game-changing idea. You build the duct tape prototype. We all have those in our garages, in our home offices. You go off and you have a massive crowdfunding campaign. Absolutely blow the numbers out, right? Well over $1 million. Barrel loads of venture capital come pouring in off of it. Immediately, you race to big box retail. That means you're at Best Buy, you're at Target, you're at Walmart, you're killing it. And you end up as a prince or a princess with your own castle. And that is the story that we love to tell. And most people, when I ask entrepreneurs, they're like, that's the path. That's the only path I can go, right? And I'm going to do it. The challenge is, for the most part, the fairy tale doesn't come true. That singular path isn't necessarily representative of the way it will go for most people. From a crowdfunding perspective, venture capitalists, for the most part, invest pre-crowdfunding. The idea is, well, I'm going to go out and have a great crowdfunding campaign, and that's going to show the VC I've got potential. VCs figure out you have potential far before then. Or if they use your crowdfunding campaign as a momentum signal, only 33% of campaigns that raised over $1 million got venture funding. So you're like, oh, I got $1 million in funding and crowdfunding. That means I'm automatically qualified for venture capital funding. You're qualified, but 66% of the time, you're not getting it. Venture capitalists, the interesting thing about them is that they fund for hundreds of millions of dollar revenue opportunities. Remember that chart that said we had this healthy group of people who said 22% said they were going to have over $5 million in revenue? By the way, that didn't move the needle for many venture capital firms. Big box retail, we all love to race there. I can tell you the horror stories, and I think almost any entrepreneur, August, Coin, all the folks will tell you that rush to build a lot of something is hugely disruptive, very, very difficult. But the interesting thing is big box retailers, they account for almost 80%, and in some cases over 80% of all consumer electronic sales. But they only stock a few SKUs. So even if you do fairly well, there's a decent chance they can't pick you up. They don't have room for you. And so with this, I don't mean to burst your bubble in any way, but big doesn't ensure a fairy tale ending. As somebody who evaluates over 800 applications a year for folks to try to come into my program, I get so many that say, I represent an opportunity in a $2 billion marketplace, right? They use TAM, which is total addressable market. And they say it's going to be big because the overall market's $2 billion. That's not the money that you're going to get. And VCs know this. And the VC requirement for big, as I previously mentioned, is way bigger than your definition. And interestingly enough, almost the most important thing I would say is that a big customer base doesn't automatically correlate to a high NPS score or Net Promoter Score, which is a sort of the benchmark on how you judge customer satisfaction with your product, or net revenue. And the key word there is net revenue. I don't care about gross revenue at some level. I care about how much you put in your pocket when it's all said and done. So I want to put up something on the board here, and I want you to read it, and I want you to raise your hands at the end if you think that this is a good business. Your team of 8, of less than 8 employees, they consistently deliver about $5 to $8 million in annual revenue, 21% net margins, and their NPS score is a 76. Is this a great business? Is this the kind of business, by the way, that you would quit whatever you were doing and go do? Okay, I see a hand. Are you raising your hand? Yeah. All right. Interestingly enough, many of you didn't raise your hands. The funny thing about this is, I'm going to argue it's a great business. Less than 8 employees. Less than 8 employees. That means they're managing their expenses. Consistently delivered $5 to $8 million in annual revenue. By the way, that means each employee had direct contribution revenue of $1 million per employee. Most corporations would kill for this number. Kill for this number. 21.4% net margins. By the way, that's Apple's net margin percentage over the last 12 months. And a 76 NPS, which is nearly unattainable, is Apple's 2013 laptop score, where they completely dominate a market segment. So the interesting thing is, I'm going to celebrate you because that gentleman just opened the champagne. All right, now that's gloating. But you have, my point is that this business, which could be selling anything, has Apple's metrics just on a much smaller scale. So if you were managing your expenses properly to this business, if you grew this business the right way, this is the kind of business where you have a nice home, nice kids, nice car, nice everything. But it's not necessarily big, but it has big where it counts. So great hardware businesses come in all sizes. So the interesting thing people ask me is, well, how do so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to fund these sort of businesses. But I'm actually going to take you to the very beginning. I'm going to challenge you as you think about either becoming an entrepreneur or as you are building your products to think about potential differently. Think different. Which most people come to me and again they say, Eric, this is a huge market opportunity. The overall market for disposable diapers in America is $4 billion a year and I'm going to command a big chunk of it. Total addressable market. As a venture capitalist, as someone who evaluates these type of things, it's the wrong metric. The interesting thing, market size is important, but it's your ability to capture revenue inside of that market. What we call service addressable market, or your ability to take a dollar moving through that ecosystem and capture it. What percentage of the dollar will you get? Because you're rarely going to get the whole dollar. So the interesting thing is that potential has multiple components. This is actually an old grid. As a serial entrepreneur, I built tons of little businesses, many of them which were never going to be more than a hobby. Serial entrepreneurs taught me to do this, to create a potential map. So I would write ideas. Those are some of my wacky ideas from a long time ago. And measure it not only in terms of market size, but market risk, as an example. How hard is it to enter this market? Who's in it? How hard is it to capture some part of the revenue stream inside of it? And I do not have time here today to go into greater detail. I'm happy to do that I have office hours later today. You send me an email. But understanding market risk, market size, and technical difficulty are factors that when combined start to tell you the potential of your business. I'm sure many of you think of an idea a day. I have 50 ideas that I keep on a list. But if I were going to stop and start a business, I need to evaluate which ones have the most potential and understand the size of that potential. If I can understand the size of the potential, I can understand how to fund it. So my key point off of this slide is that potential has many components. It's a composite score that you're trying to build. And that potential at some level will tell you how to fund the business. So don't think immediately about how do I get to venture capital. First, think about the size of the business you're going to build and understand whether venture capital is even an option for you. So how do you do that? You really have to define your customer, right? When we talk about market size. Number one error I see consistently is you think you're your own customer, right? We love to do that. We love to build products for ourselves, right? We're entrepreneurs. We think that way all day. The challenge is you can't make a business selling to yourself. You have to sell to the mainstream customer, whatever that is for your segment. Number two, you mistake crowdfunding customers for mainstream customers. 300 million Americans. There are definitely 1,000 people in America with enough money to buy anything. I'm the prime candidate. I have a Kickstarter addiction. I have an Indiegogo addiction. But that doesn't make me your customer. I'll still buy your product. But my point is that the mainstream customer, we always like to say that's a grandmother in Duluth, right? That's a father in Mississippi. Selling to them, you have to understand that customer. Crowdfunding can potentially give you a false positive that there are more customers than there really are for your product. You need to create a tight demographic and psychographic for your target customers. You need to have a picture on your wall that this is who I'm selling to. And what is a demographic and a psychographic? Again, not enough time to explain it, but look down at the bottom. It's Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They're married, 2 kids, college education, $225,000 annual income, HHI, household income. I know their zip code, and once I know that information and I know their psychographics, some information about them, I can zero in and market to them and I can scope them. I can use this data to tell you exactly how many American households fall into that characteristic, which by the way is 2 million. Test your product to see if the customer actually wants it. Don't build something until you've tested it. And there are great ways, and again, I'm not going to go into the detail here. These slides will be made available about how you can advertise your product before you ever finish prototyping it and understand potential customer demand and things like price elasticity. And then follow the money trail. I can then tell you what the size of your market is. Map the ecosystem. Take a simple sheet of paper and write everybody who's involved in the ecosystem of the product that you want to make. Who makes them, who sells them, who buys them, who influences the purchasing decision, and determine where you're going to fit on that map. When you do that, you can better understand your potential, scope the competitive landscape, and with all of this information, I can build you a rough revenue model. I can take your data and in 10 minutes give you the rough revenue model that you could take to any venture capitalist. It's simple to do, but if you don't do it, you're flying blind. So now about funding options in my limited remaining time. I break these into 2 tracks, venture and what I'm going to call traditional funding. I'm not going to cover the venture track here. It's not the point. I'm going to talk about some traditional opportunities. Profit exists at every size, but all funding options do not. I stared at this slide for hours. I reviewed it with my partners. I called 15 venture capitalists up before I wrote this slide because this slide is a scary slide at some level. It tells you that if you have a business with less than $10 million a year of annual revenue, you have no opportunity to get venture capital. No is a strong word, but it is incredibly limited. If your business is between $10 and $100 million a year, it depends on the firm. Andreessen Horowitz has over $4.3 billion under management. For them to put $10 million into your company that only makes $30 million a year, no matter almost what your exit is, they can't make any money off of you. It's not that they don't love your product, and oh, by the way, they'll buy it on Kickstarter, but they can't fund it. It just doesn't move their economics. So you have to know the right firms to go to. But the traditional options are available to you, and as your business grows, it becomes easier. Traditional vehicles, right? Friends and family. Every company that I see has some amount of friends and family, money in it, interestingly enough. The thing I always say is remember to treat them like qualified investors and to teach them that this is a long-term investment. Most businesses don't pay out for between 5 and 10 years to an eventual outcome, unless you want to hold on to it forever, which I also encourage. So you have to think about it that way. SBIR grants, in Canada, this is known as SRED, S-R-E-D. There are great programs that the government has created for small businesses. It takes a little while to apply for them. It's a little bit of a Byzantine process. But smart businesses use government leverage when they can. And this isn't for everybody, but you should explore this early on. The federal government wants to invest money in you. Crowdfunding is going to get covered later. I think Kate from Indiegogo is going to be talking about it. It has become an amazing vehicle to help your business. But remember that it is a booster. It is not a permanent revenue stream. It creates a viral community for you. Later on, we can talk about things like factory financing. I think Hackcelerator has done some great slides on this, lines of credit and loans. But the interesting thing about those is that there is a valley of death when it comes to revenue, which I will not have time to cover today. After you ship, one of the hardest times for a company is after your crowdfunding campaign, after your revenue drops 90% to regular sales, and you have to do inventory turns and capital gets crunched. That is what's known in our segment, in the hardware entrepreneur segment, as the valley of death. If I were building a small business, and again, compressed time frame, I would be focused on getting the cash flow positive right away. A huge fallacy I hear is, I'm going to drop the cost of my crowdfunding campaign because I want more customers. And I'm going to come underneath the golden ratio in consumer electronics of 2.5 to 3x BOM to price ratio. It's great, but remember the oldest adage, you can always lower a price, but you can never raise it. And so the interesting thing is you bought customers at the expense of margin, and if you don't watch your margin as a small business owner, you'll never have enough money to do your own inventory turns. Thrive in high margin channels. Retail is a killer. 50% of your margin goes to Mr. Best Buy, not to you. Why would you give away 50% of your money as a new business owner where every dollar counts? Own your own crowdfunding community is an option. Charging the right multiples of your BOM. Do not undercharge for your product. NPS is your mantra. Encourage viral sales. Optimize your D2C sales pipeline. The slides are online. Run a business. If I would summarize it in one set of words, run a thriving small business. Don't grow too fast. Focus on cash, because your money is the money that more than likely is going to be the big part of the fuel for your business. So don't grow up to try to be a venture-funded size company when your revenue will never support it. Control expenses. Engineer for quality. NPS and virality is one of the fastest way to get to customers. Customers selling customers. But attack BOM as soon as you can because it will influence overall the long-term growth. Don't grow too fast. Oh, I forgot to put the other O in there, or yeah. Don't grow too fast in terms of full-time employees. And assemble in-house and local for a while, if realistic. A lot of folks are like, I got to get to a CM. By the way, most CMs don't want to see you. And by learning how to assemble in-house or locally, you learn how your product's manufactured. You go through the DFM process intimately. And then when you can scale, you'll be able to much better describe the product to whoever's going to either end up assembling it or doing, sort of more aggressive work with you around the manufacturing process. A tremendous amount to say, small amount of time. I will be doing office hours later today, but if you walk away with one thing, hardware businesses can be great businesses at all different sizes. Just think about how to build the business model and plan up front for what you think to be the eventual size of the business. Don't believe the fairy tale, go with realism.